Hello everyone, my name is Nick Infernus and welcome back to another list video. And this will be a first for my channel where we update a previous list. In this case, it's Transformers Studio Series Gamer Edition. So the last time I talked about these figures in a list like this was last year. I want to say around this time. And this will probably be the last time I do a video like this for these figures as well. One, because, I'm going to be stopping my collection of these guys after this year, just due to space. And also because next year we're getting mostly repaints. The Autobot Soldier is still up in the air, but Ironhide, Thundercracker, and Skywarp, yeah, those are definitely going to be repaints. Another thing that I will mention before we get into the list is that I'm going to keep my notes on the older figures to a minimum. That came out weird. To a minimum, mainly because I've already talked about them before in Optimus's case like twice. And for the figures that I talked about in my Studio Series 2024 video, I will be expanding my thoughts on those since I haven't really talked about them in a format like this yet. So with all that being said, let's start the list at number 10. You knew it. You knew going into this video that Barricade was going to be the worst. I don't hate him like some other people do, but when you compare him to all of the other figures on this list, even the ones that have soured on me a good amount, he's just the most obvious answer. He's the one who's choking on his kibble. He's the one who's choking the most on his kibble. He's the one with the worst posing, the one with the simplest and least satisfying transformation. He does have the alt mode going for him, but that's kind of it. Just in general, he's just a mediocre figure, but thankfully we will later find that there is a good figure hiding somewhere in this mold. Number 9, we've got Cliffjumper, and this should tell you who number 8 is unless you haven't seen the previous video. In general, this mold has soured on me a good amount. The transformation still isn't fun, and the proportions are just weird as hell. He's got stumpy arms, noodle legs, and I don't know what the hell is going on with the chest. Posing is just kind of average, and on the Cliffjumper version of the mold, the head is especially limited, mainly due to its shape. Alt mode is still basically perfect, but the back does not like staying closed. I know that Hasbro product photography has, a tendency to not be the best, but honestly, this image of the alt mode really is a fair representation of how it is, because as you can see, the back panel is not down all the way. That is how it is on my version of the figure. I don't know if that's how it is for other versions of it, but pretty accurate to how mine is. So going from Cliffjumper, we now have Bumblebee at number 8. This is mostly just the Cliffjumper before Cliffjumper, just with a more articulated head and a back panel that actually likes to stay closed. Still the same, fiddly transformation, the same average posing, and the same weird proportions. Number 7, we have the Decepticon Soldier, a figure I originally wasn't going to buy because it was a retool of Barricade. But I saw it on a shelf and it was tempting, so I bought it so I could properly update this video. And to the figure's credit, it proved that there was in fact a good figure hiding in the bones of Barricade. In general, it definitely does a better job standing than the Barricade does. I forgot to mention that. That thing does not like standing up unless it's leaning forward. But it also manages to kibble a good amount better. The legs still end up pretty much the same, but the backpack is a lot cleaner, mostly from the front. You don't really see a lot of it from the front. And its posing is also a lot better. The elbows bend deeper, the knees bend deeper, the feet are a lot tighter, and they're bigger. And in general, the mass down there is bigger, so he has a much better time standing. By posing standards, it's still extremely average. Like, it's just 90 degrees of elbows and knees, and then everything else is either restricted or slightly better than on Barricade. But again, compared to Barricade, it's still better than anything you'll get with him. Transformation, it's debatable whether or not I think this is better or worse. I would say it's better since more stuff, clicks and snaps into place, unlike Barricade where you have to kind of squish it. And I do like the alt mode more, even though, well, actually I'd say I like the alt mode on Barricade more, but this is still nice. The alt mode was the only good thing on Barricade, so it's not really that much of an insult to say that I like this less. It's mostly just the shape and the colors and the fact that, this part here doesn't exactly like to sit flush, but it's still a nice vehicle mode. Whether or not this ends up being used for the Autobot Trooper has yet to be seen, and we probably won't see it until like June, July of next year. And I'm kind of hoping they don't do that because this feels, pretty. This feels like it should easily be its own thing, and I'm kind of hoping that they do retool the Autobot Trooper out of the Sideswipe that we'll be talking about in a bit. But as its own figure, it's pretty nice, and as a troop builder, I'd say it's a worthy one. Now at number 6, reaching the halfway point, we have our only reactivate figure on this list, Bumblebee. I still have no idea what's going on with the reactivate game, and frankly, I don't think anybody does. But it is nice that they're releasing those 2-pack figures in the Studio Series line as their own standalone releases, because not everyone was fortunate enough to have a comic shop that had the 2-packs. I managed to get all 4 of those figures from my local comic shop, but for pretty much everyone else, you had to order it online. So having these individual releases, it is pretty nice. Though it's interesting that they chose Bumblebee because, at least in my opinion, this is the weakest one. He's still really good, but compared to Soundwave, who poses the best, Starscream, who's overall pretty good, and then Optimus, who is just a slam dunk of a figure, or at least a near slam dunk of a figure, Bumblebee's just kind of there. In both robot mode and vehicle mode, he looks awesome, and a great new aesthetic for the classic Kid Appeal Autobot. Kind of a more apocalyptic Mad Maxy kind of feel. Maybe not Mad Max, it's not extreme enough for that, but apocalyptic definitely. And I love the little off-road buggy that he turns into. That's just a great little alt mode for Bumblebee. Though this figure is let down by its average posing and a transformation that's, I'm going to be honest, the weakest of the 3. It's very fiddly. It's hard to get your hands at some parts, and it doesn't exactly like holding together the best, at least until you get the doors in. So it's not necessarily a fun figure to mess with, but it's definitely an awesome display, especially since this is pretty big for a deluxe. I guess for a comparison, it's about 86 Ironhide or Legacy Cybertron Hotshot sized. So, big for a deluxe, and it definitely does a good job of hiding the kibble. So I don't really know if they'll release the other Reactivate figures into the Studio Series line, but I hope they do because it's a pretty good sub-line of figures. Number 5, we have our first Voyager and one of our only new ones, Ratchet. This is a figure that's recently been praised as being the best figure that Gamer Edition has put out, and I don't know if I can agree with that sentiment, but this is still a great figure in general. In terms of proportions, I'd say it's probably, the best one in that regard, aside from the, flat arms. Like, the arms do look a little weird with how flat they are, especially since there's a panel on the back of the hands there. But for the most part, I think the proportions on this guy work a lot better than some of the other figures, especially some of the ones lower on the list. And even if they didn't, the robot mode still captures the War for Cybertron Ratchet design very well. Posing is unfortunately pretty limited on him. It's just 90 elbows and knees again, and then nothing else special. I do like that when you take off the arm for the gun gimmick, that you can store it in the backpack. That's a nice little bit of, limb storage that honestly I wish they had done on the other figures, but hindsight. And the transformation I'm kind of mixed on. On the one hand, it is nice and involved, and it is pretty satisfying when you're done, but at the same time, it's also kind of fiddly. There are some parts that like to pop off. It doesn't exactly like holding together the best, but honestly, it's all worth it for what's probably the best alt mode on the list, if only because of how well it rolls. It does also do a good job of capturing the alt mode from the game, but it rolls like little else in my collection. It's probably one of the best rolling vehicles I have. So it's still a great figure, all things considered. I would have liked it to be better, but for what it is, it's still pretty great. Number 4, we have the only time a deluxe has overtaken a Voyager on this list, Sideswipe. I remember the first time I got this guy, and he was a little underwhelming at first. The transformation wasn't exactly the most fun, and honestly, that was probably the only issue I had with him, because this figure overall is pretty great. The robot mode, yeah, there are some pretty wonky proportions here. He's got some skinny arms and a puppy chest and some noodle legs, plus some 2x4s for feet that don't pivot. Unfortunate. But outside of that, I'd say the robot mode does a pretty good job, at properly capturing the design from the game. I know I just said that for Ratchet, but I don't really know how else to say that. And at the very least, it does a better job than his original figure, where they just use the hood for his chest and call it a day. I know that's what Sideswipe does, but that's not what they did for this guy. At least not in this game. Though I can kind of see some resemblance in this bit right here in the chest, but I don't know, maybe I'm just seeing stuff. This is probably the best posing deluxe on the list, since both the elbows and the knees, maybe not the knees, but definitely the elbows, pull more than a 90. He has very stable feet that also have an upward pivot, so you can get him to poses that way. And in general, there's not a lot that's really restricted here. I mean, the shoulders are a bit of a pain to use because the ball peg joint that they're on is at an angle, which is a weird choice. But out of the deluxes, he's easily the one with the deepest ranges in his joints, and therefore the best posing. The transformation, again, the first time it was a little annoying, but once you get used to it, it's a pretty solid affair, and it leads to an alt mode that's a really good Cybertronian sports car. Honestly, it is something that I can see Sideswipe turning into. And while it doesn't roll as good as the Ratchet, it does also roll pretty well, provided you don't peg the feet in. So of the deluxes, this is definitely the best one, and the one that I'm hoping that they retool into the Autobot Soldier. Though honestly, even if they do it from the Decepticon Soldier, I'd probably be okay with that too. Number 3 is Megatron. And this is a pretty controversial one, to my understanding, mainly because of his knees and also the fact that certain parts, aren't as big as aren't, the way that people would like. The fusion cannon is the one that sticks out, though I would like to state that that is just the fusion cannon from the game. A lot of people were saying it's like, oh, it's not the same as on the old toy. Well, that old toy wasn't exactly accurate to the game. This is. You may not like that, but that's what Studio Series is trying to go for, even if it doesn't always hit the mark, Bumblebee and Cliffjumper. In terms of robot mode, I'd say this is a pretty good look for Megatron, and it's got a pretty good weight to it too, despite being a small Voyager. Posing is probably the second best of the line, even with his knees, which, I mean, you can just cut off the tab, so there is that. Transformation's pretty simple, but also pretty fun. And the tank mode, I still have not found a tank mode that I like swooshing around more. Granted, I don't know if I've really gotten a lot of tanks since this guy, but still. Honestly, the most impressive thing about this guy is the fact that they were able to use this for the comic edition subline for Flame. Honestly, if anything, that's probably the most impressive thing about this guy. They were able to turn this into a G1 character and have it fit. Runner-up at number 2 is Voyager Starscream, a figure that people had doubts about when we got these images. Not that I blame them. I mean, look at those arms. Those look noodle thin, like Bumblebee, Cliffjumper, and Sideswipe's legs. But in person, I do find that they have more mass to them than what we see in the pictures. And besides that, this figure is pretty freaking awesome. I don't know if it'll make the best of the year, but you can definitely expect to see it in the video. For the look, it's a little off in some places, mainly the chest, but I can see, why they wouldn't want to put paint on there. It is rubber, and if they did solid clear plastic, that would probably cause a breakage risk, so I can understand it here, and I can forgive it. It doesn't look too bad. It also is probably the best posing figure on the list, with extremely deep elbows and decently deep knees, and some pretty big feet, and a backpack that actually cleans up very well. Transformation is another complex one, but a pretty fun process, resulting in a very chunky jet mode, but it still works pretty well for Starscream, and especially for the Starscream from this game. While I wouldn't say it's the best Gamer Edition figure that we've gotten, it is the best one that we've gotten this year, which leaves number 1 as still being Optimus. I don't think this is going to change anytime soon, even with me stopping my collection of these guys. I have a feeling that this could still end up being the best of the Gamer Edition figures. It's not the most accurate robot mode, but it is the robot mode that I like the most of these, mainly just because of how strong it looks. It's a very beefy design for Optimus, and I think it works pretty well for him. Posing, that still goes to Starscream, but it's still pretty good here. The transformation is still really fun, and it probably has one of my favorite alt modes on this list, even if the fist hanging out the back isn't exactly great. There were a lot of primes reissued this year, and I'm glad that this was one of them because it was pretty hard to find initially. So I'm definitely glad that they put them back out there for those who wanted them. But anyways, guys, that'll be it for my update of my Gamer Edition Worst to Best. If you enjoyed, feel free to like and subscribe for more fun content. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and Godspeed.